You're a coward and a crook. You promised her everything, and you stole it back for yourself. Lava spits, and the room tilts into static. Forks freeze mid-air. The band drops a beat, and my granddaughter's face goes the exact color of diner coffee, left too long under a heat lamp. I feel each eye like a hand on my shoulder, and the hand I want most to steady me. Maya's small one, curled in the crook of her mother's elbow, trembles, and I tell myself before the shame swallows the rest that I will not look away. My name is Frank Dawson. I'm 69 and I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. I say nothing at first because saying nothing is a muscle I learned to use in boardrooms and pickup trucks and late-night hospital corridors. My silence is an instrument tuned to listen. Around us, murmurs fan out like cigarette smoke, and Michael, my son, pats his tie in a way I have seen him do since he was 12, nervously knotting laces before a tryout. He looks guilty, but practiced, the way men who decide to betray try to make it look like a choice they'd never had to consider. Laura's voice has that new cold edge that comes from long-planned speeches. She is married to a man with a camera on his phone, and his lens is already hunting the obvious angles. You promised Evelyn a home, she says, and you put her on a charity list only because you'd rather make a press release than keep a promise. Someone near the buffet laughs in the way people laugh when they want to be on the right side of history, even if they're only backing the loudest voice. It feels like salt. The plaque on the podium bears my name because the museum board put up a piece in my honor this week, and all of this, the stakes, the speeches, the framed photos of me shaking mayors' hands, has been a construction I built for years so my people would have a foothold when I was gone. I need Maya to see me steady, to feel that what we leave matters beyond money. But Lavra has chosen the night of my tribute to humiliate me in front of a dozen donors, former colleagues, and the one grandchild I want to teach to stand differently than her mother. I taste metal. The bartenders keep pouring. I stand and move closer to the microphone like a man who is figuring out how to use the world as a tool. My voice is lower than hers, but I let it be the river that forces the current to show its stones. I do not plead innocence. Pleading is for the weak and for stories that hope someone else will rewrite them. Instead, I speak the truth so precisely that it has no room to hide. I promised Evelyn a home, and I kept that promise, I say. And even as the statement lands, I file away the ways this room will remember me. My son's eyes narrowing, the mic picking up the edge of a cough from the left, Maya pressing a napkin into her mouth, as if to stop sound. In the back, Gordon Price, the lawyer who handled my trust funds for 20 years, looks away. His hand betrays nothing, but there is a slight lift at his right brow that says he knows more than he lets on. My body remembers the nights of ledger work, the cheap coffee, the hands of my father trembling on a screwdriver as he taught me to fix a squeaking hinge. Legacy weighs the way a truck weighs on a frozen bridge, and I am damned if I will let it break because my children prefer a quick, warm patch. At the peak of my quiet fury, a thought unspools into a sentence I keep to myself until I can make it work for me. A man is the ledger of his promises, and every blank is a silence that demands payment. That line sits in my rib like a coin you don't spend, heavy and honest. It is law and threat both. Bystanders shift. Some lean in because they're watching an unraveling. Some because they are seeing a man they thought they knew stripped down to the skeleton of his choices. The band resumes uncertainly, and the evening goes on like an animal deciding whether to run back into fire or forward into smoke. I walk off the tiny stage into the cooler air of the service corridor, with laughter echoing like a slap. Maya follows me, tiny shoes skidding on linoleum, and she looks up at me with a question so pure it hurts. Did I make you proud? I fold her into my coat and tell her we will fix things together, and because I have spent my life converting principles into plans, the first flicker in my mind is not fury, but logistics. Names, dates, copies, bank branches, signatures, the architecture of inheritance that my children thought they could reorder while I drank the toast. I let them believe they have scared me. I let Laura leave with the crowd's applause and the hollow triumph of someone who cleaned a wound with a spotlight. And I begin, like a man who picks up a map in wartime, to mark routes the betrayers did not account for. The dinner set me off sharp and silent, and I feel the old habit of action settle in. Move first, explain later, because in my town, in the line of men before me, promises weren't solved by speeches, but by the slow, stubborn, plain work of making right what had been bent. I drive home through the late October drizzle, truck headlights cutting the wet black like knives, and my hands stay on the wheel, not to steady the vehicle, but to steady the catalog of names that must be visited. Laura and Michael, Gordon Price, the bank officer who notarized a last-minute update, they showed to me after a long lunch, and Evelyn Brooks, whose smile at Thanksgiving 3 years ago anchored a decision I swore I'd keep. The city is a string of lit signs and sleeping diners, the electricity humming like distant applause. And I make lists on a scrap of paper the way I used to draw blueprints, precise measurements of time and consequence. I call Evelyn that night because she has the first right to know she was cut. Her voice is thin but steady when she answers, the way an old lineman speaks after climbing the same pole for decades. She is surprised, then hurt, then mad, and her fury is the kind that builds a furnace. It feels good to hand her some wood to burn. There is a memory I do not allow to soften. The moment I signed a document that ended a long lease for her, the ink still smelling slightly of lemon oil. That signature was made because I wanted the next generation to have a roof, and now the roof is being used as a stage to humiliate me. I hire a private auditor who once worked under my watch, and who owes me the kind of loyalty that runs deeper than family. His name is Ron Ellis, an old Navy man with hands like charcoal, and he tells me over coffee at dawn that papers leave traces, even when men try to scrub them. The truth, Ron says, not as philosophy but as theory you can apply, is like gunpowder. The right spark will show all the places someone hid smoke. That line sits in the air and sets the direction for everything that follows. It's not a metaphor, it's a tool. We begin to dig. Scans of emails, timestamps, a notarized signature that looks like mine but under magnification has the tremor of a different hand. Lavra keeps her social calendar full, posts a photo of Maya at a playground with a caption about family values and the dissonant tastes of cheap wine. I send a carefully framed message to Gordon Price asking for a full accounting of transactions related to Evelyn's trust. His reply is formal and thin, a lawyer's architecture of words meant to look like cooperation while building distance. Michael, who always liked to keep his hands visible and therefore free for theft, starts avoiding my calls. I find out that the update they had me sign during a luncheon was not signed by me at all. They had used a doctored notary form and a hurried signature that mimicked the way my hand was in its third glass of Merlot at the time. Rage rises, but I trap it. because anger is a blunt instrument, and what I need is a scalpel. I set the pieces into a trap that looks like complacency. I arrange for an audit of the notary's records at the bank branch they used. I transfer assets that are liquid into an account with strict watching, and I quietly record a conversation with Gordon about ethical obligations that starts with niceties and ends with admissions. My plan is built not to destroy my children, but to demand the law treat their choices like the fraud they are. I owe Evelyn that, and I owe Maya the sight of justice done. At times the work is mechanical and cold. Letters, subpoenas, the petty cruelty following paper trails, and at other times it is thunderous, like when I watch a file open and see a date that proves they met the day they planned to rearrange my life. The tension grows like pressure under ice. Each discovery is a new crack, and every crack insists we act before the river gives way. I sleep in short pockets because old habits die in fragments. When I do dream, I dream of my father lifting his chin against a storm and telling me to count the screws twice. The plan requires patience that tastes like metallic lozenges and the grit of old highways, and I trade the early, warm consolations of family for the cold arithmetic of restitution, because something older than pride tells me a promise is a ledger that must be squared. The noose tightens in the way a legal man knows well, not with theatrics, but with evidence layered so precisely that every lie collapses under its own making. Ron finds a bank clerk, Teresa, who remembers the lunch because she was the one who fetched us lemon scones that day. Her memory is the hinge on which the whole thing will turn. She tells us of a man in a blue jacket who stayed too long at a table, and of a notarized pad with a serial number that doesn't match the one in the branch's ledger book. We get surveillance footage from a neighboring pharmacy, and Michael is there, pacing with 2 cups of coffee, like a man waiting for a signal. I sit in a small conference room, smelling of paper and institutional coffee, and listen as the footage plays at double speed, then at normal, then frame by frame, until the seconds feel like evidence bayonets. Gordon, who once used to bring his children to my backyard barbecue, and who raised a glass with me to seal corporate deals, starts to fidget when I mention a formal complaint to the state bar. His practiced calm is pocked with fissures. I arrange a family mediation, publicly, because I know how our town loves a reconciliation narrative, and I plan to use that ritual as bait. Laura accepts the invite with a smile honed to television ratings. Michael says he will come home from a business trip he claims is urgent, but which my surveillance shows ended early. The mediation is set in the municipal hall, where the tapes will not be turned off, where court reporter sits with a thin pad and a pen like a patient spider. I step onto the stage again with Maya beside me, because there is no better audience to have than the child whose future my oath promised to protect. My statement is short. I present a packet of documents I had Ron assemble, not just the questionable notarization, but the emails between Laura and Gordon that show in plain prose an intention to rewrite the distribution of assets while I was kept placated. When the court reporter reads a line out loud from an email that talks about redirecting funds quietly and removing Evelyn, the room tastes of metal, and the woman in the second row who once hosted fundraisers for the museum covers her mouth. Laura's face goes from practice to pale like a photograph in a fixer. Michael shifts from bluff to a child, pleading that no one understands the pressures of modern life. I let them speak. I let them try to turn my slow justice into melodrama. At a moment when Lover reaches for the sympathetic audience, I play the recorded conversation with Gordon, where he chuckles at the ease of the arrangement and mentions a friend at the bank who handles the logistics. The chuckle is the sound of a man who thinks rules bend for those with cash. In the playback, it sounds like a confession. The double exposure of audio and text is surgical. The email threads show intent, the footage shows presence, and Gordon's voice ties it into an actionable scheme. I have planted nothing illegal, only prepared papers and the truth, and the law, a blunt but steady instrument, begins to do its work. Bystanders stir, someone calls a lawyer they know, and the municipal hall fills with a practical fury. I recognize this town will not abide being lied to within its churches and charity committees. At the peak of that fury, I hear another line form in my head, and I let it out, quiet, to Maya, who holds my hand. Justice is not the hammer of revenge. It is the steady clock that returns what time stole. The phrase is not meant to be pretty, but to be precise. It is the principle I have been living by. The mediator calls for a recess as whispers become a gale, and Lavra stands like a woman whose stage has been taken down while the audience watches the ropes being coiled. What happens next is the part of the story people like because it makes a clean ending, but life does not hand out clean endings. It hands you consequences, and they are worse for those who tried to buy a cleaner conscience. The double twist arrives in two small, merciless movements. First, the bank's forensic unit, the one I had insisted they bring in under the guise of routine auditing, discovers that the notary Gordon used as part of a ring that had been altering templates for clients who wanted expedience over ethics. The paperwork is a breadcrumb trail that leads to a man in another state who keeps ledgers like men keep secrets. When they call him, he is shocked to learn his name is on forms he never signed. Second, the IRS, tipped off by a procedural referral that Ron had the fortitude to make, finds that the way Lara and Michael reallocated assets triggered a chain of tax and fraud flags. They had structured transfers through shell accounts set up by a consultant who had a disturbing habit of flipping clients when the heat got high. That consultant flips, in turn, when faced with the evidence I had quietly bought with years of careful favors. He has incriminating emails of his own, and when threatened with criminal charges, he confesses not only to helping my children, but to having siphoned off money into a personal account. The confession cascades. Police arrive at dawn not to take me, as my children had hoped when they thought they'd make me look incompetent, but to take statements and then detain the consultant and the notary. Gordon, confronted by his own recorded laugh and the ledger of emails, is suspended by the bar pending a full investigation. Lara and Michael watch from opposite sides of a glass that neither can break because it is now reinforced by evidence. They are both charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and with forging documents, and for a man who always preferred to keep a cool head, seeing them pounded by paperwork and indictment is a bitter clarity. Yet justice is not painless. The town speaks in halves. Some call me vindictive, others call me brave. Maya cries for a while because her parents are taken away in cuffs, and she can't reconcile the people who wrote her birthday cards with the facts laid out in an affidavit. Evelyn, whose name had been stripped from an announced gift, receives instead the full accounting and the house deed that I had quietly resecured and put in escrow under an independent trusteeship. The deed is real and unassailable, because I did the one thing they didn't account for. I moved the asset into a trust overseen by a neutral foundation with a board my father would have respected. The legal system grinds and chugs and eventually aligns. There is restitution ordered, criminal charges prosecuted, and a town that watches the spectacle as if it were a necessary cleansing. At a private hearing, Gordon pleads guilty to a lesser count in exchange for testimony, and the consultant's ledger prints show transactions that net the prosecution an easy route to demonstrate intent. My children lose more than their standing. They lose the easy assumption that money buys absolution. I do not celebrate. Celebration would be obscene. Instead, I stand at Evelyn's new front steps with a single key in my hand and watch her unlock the door. Maya runs ahead of us into the house and touches the walls in the way children verify reality, and I feel the jaggedness of what we have all been through settle into something like the clean, cold hurt of a wound stitched right. I walk away from the courthouse under a sky that is honest and gray, carrying the knowledge that the ledger balanced not because I wanted blood, but because some debts were not moral, but legal, and needed accounting. I am scarred, my trust is broken, my family is fractured, and the town will have stories that will not spare anyone. But I keep one small, plain lesson for myself and for Maya, because the world needs clear things sometimes. Keep your promises, and when someone breaks them, let the law do its patient work. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. It helps us share more true stories like this.